I heard a story this week. I thought it was appropriate for next week, unfortunately. I'm not preaching next week, preaching this week, but I'm going to give it to you anyway, so just remember this story for next week. Everybody remembers back in the good old days, when you go to elementary school and you got to participate in show and tell, right? Everybody loved bringing something from their home to be able to show the whole class. And it was the most exciting thing on the face of the earth. So this story, teacher tells all of our students that she wants them to bring something in the next day that represents their religion and then to speak about it. So Ben, he brought in the Star of David and he explained what that meant to his Jewish upbringing. They discussed kind of a neat little time. Mary brought in a crucifix. She shared what that meant to the Catholic faith. Tommy jumped up and says, "Oh boy, it's my turn. Gather round, everyone. I brought a casserole because I'm Baptist." Let's pray. Lord God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that we can come into your house. And Lord, even though there's a little bit of snow, that everybody was able to get here safely and be able to worship you and receive your word. Lord, I pray that you will take me completely out of this. And that I ask that you will speak your words. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. We're going to be going out of 2 John, and I'll be honest with you, I have known about this for well over a month. I've read the passage several times. Each time that I read 2 John, I see something different. I cannot tell you what you're going to hear today because after I read it again, I might see something else and I might talk about that. Go off the cuff here. But the first time I read it, I quickly identified some minor points and some major points, and those have basically stood the entire time. So let's read 2 John, and then we'll talk about these minor and major points that I've identified. 2 John, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ the Father's Son in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out in the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such is one as the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. So we'll start off by saying who is writing this letter and who is the letter addressed to. Well, this is still John, the apostle, Jesus' best friend, the one that he walked with, the author of the Gospel of John, the author of 1 John. But this time he identifies himself as an elder. This is really, I should have broke this Bible down better. He identifies himself as an elder. And why would he do that? Well, just as you have probably many hats that you identify yourself as, John was identifying himself not as the apostle, not as the apostle that walked with Jesus and taught with Jesus, but now a leader of a church. And so now he is identifying himself as an elder, just as many of you have all of the different hats that you wear. Peter also identified himself as elder also, and that's in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. So just turn back a few pages. 1 Peter 5, verse 1, so I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So he identifies himself there as an elder, but also as an apostle because he was with Christ. So 2 John is written by John, the John that we know. And now we look at the second minor point, and that's going to be who is the elect lady and her children. Now, when you read this, instead of actually thinking that John is writing to a woman, this is likely to another congregation. So he identifies himself as an elder, probably of another congregation, and so he's writing to another church so that they they'll know his words. He identifies himself. For one, it was not proper for a John to write to a Christian woman, sharing his love with her, as he does in this letter. And the second hint is this, that the last verse, the children of your elect sister greet you. So he's writing from one church to another church. Next point is the truth. You see that in 2 John many times about the truth. If you'll turn over to John chapter 14, verses 1 through 7, Jesus identifies himself as the truth. So you'll see John speaking of the truth. Jesus is the truth. And so this is a way that the first century church can identify with Christ. John 14, verse 1, it says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you will be also. And you know the way where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So, Jesus is the truth. Now, John is writing to this other church. They are able to identify with Christ as the truth. And then my last little point is verse 12 in 2 John. Now that we're in the day of cell phones, with the ability to make a phone call, text message, email, or basically anything else you want to do from your phone. We can do all that stuff. But isn't it better when you're able to sit down face to face in front of somebody that you want to talk to, somebody that you love? So he speaks to this church in loving remarks in his greeting. And then in verse 12 he says, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk to you face to face so that our joy may be complete. Isn't it cool that he wants to sit down with them and he wants to visit with them and share with them? So that wraps up minor points. Verse 4 through 6. I want to talk about the two major points that I noticed here. Starting in verse 4, I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. So he was able to rejoice because he did find others, possibly from this other church that he's writing to. He had visited with them. He was able to speak with them. Likely that was what caused him to write this letter. Maybe that they had talked about maybe some dissension that was going in at the church. The tone of John's letter in this section makes it seem like the congregation needed this letter. When I first read the passage, 2 John, I got to that part where it says the commandment from the very beginning, and I took it very literally. And so I went all the way back to Genesis, and I'm like scouring, and I'm like, what commandment did God have about love in the very beginning? Well, if you go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, I found God's first commandment to a human being. And it says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the birds in the heavens, and every other living thing that moves on the earth. And I said, well, that was great. I mean, that's a form of love, yes, but that's not what John was talking about. And so I pieced through Genesis, and I went page by page, and I saw different commands that God gave individuals at that time, and nothing was about love that I could see. I made it all the way to Exodus chapter 20. I found the 10 Commandments. There are some commandments in there about love, yes. But then it dawned on me that if you'll turn over to Matthew chapter 22, that Jesus gave 2 commandments, that if you follow these 2 commandments, it covers all of Moses' commandments. So Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 36, well, let's just go up to do the whole section. So verse 34, but when the Pharisees had heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So with those 2 commandments, he erased all of the other stuff from the Old Testament. If you love God with everything you have, and you love your neighbor like you're supposed to, like you want to be loved, then you've covered all of the things from the past. Who's in customer service? Anyone? Few. I know Kurt was in customer service for years. Kirk and Jacob, customer service. You guys wouldn't have jobs if you didn't know how to talk to people. Because if you don't know how to talk to people, and you don't know how to treat people, then you're not going to have customers. And then therefore you don't have a job. Other people that's in customer service, if you don't know how to talk to people and you don't know how to treat people, then you don't have a job. They'll move on to the next person. If you're working for a company, they'll move on. So now you know how to talk to someone and you know how to treat someone. Now we just have to kind of work on that. Kind of make it a little better, right? I'm a dog lover, and I'm not trying to offend anyone that is not a dog lover. But the last time I went to our vet, I saw 2 little sayings posted on their wall. And if we could figure this out, like these sayings on the wall at the vet's office, it'll help us with Jesus' commands. The first one says, Dear God, help me be the person that my dog thinks that I am. Right? Dog lovers, dog owners. What does your dog think of you? It thinks of you as the feeder, the protector. Sometimes they want to be the protector. But there is unconditional love. The other one was this. A dog is the only thing on earth that loves you more than it loves itself. Take it for what it's worth. Again, this is not gospel from the vet's office. This is just the couple of sayings that I saw. We've got this puppy. He's 5 months old. He's as wild as the day is long. And we've crate trained the little fella, and that basically amounts to puppy prison. So you tell the dog to go to jail, and he excitedly runs wagging his tail, goes in, sits down, waits for his treat, then the gate, and now he's in prison for as long as he has to be there. And when you come home and you let him out of puppy jail, he's wagging his tail, he's licking you, and he can't wait to talk to you and figure out what's going on, or what we're going to do next, or if there's going to be some more food, or if we're going to go for a walk, or if we're going to go chase something. Can you love like that? Can you love like a dog? Because the dog is kind of like God's animal. Unconditional. Doesn't matter if it's just been in puppy prison for half the day, it still can't wait to see you when you walk in the door. Again, sorry, I don't mean to preach out of the vet's office. But there is some context there. The next is a story about me, and it's not one that I'm very proud of. I have 7 nieces and nephews. The oldest ones were babies. I loved to hold them, feed them, changed a few diapers. I just loved being an uncle when they were little. And then they got a little bigger and mouthier and didn't listen, and then I had my own to worry about and instruct and direct and make sure that things were going right, and so I just didn't really pay that much attention to my nieces and nephews anymore. And then somehow I kind of went into the kind of the grumpy uncle, and at some points I was just kind of a jerk. And I don't really know why. I'm not proud of it, but they just kind of didn't really care too much about me because I didn't really care that much about them. Now, anything that they needed, I loved them unconditionally, whatever, but as far as like spending time with them and sitting down with them and playing and all that stuff, I just never did it. After Halloween, before Thanksgiving, the Holy Spirit really started working on me and was telling me I needed to change my relationship with my family. And mind you, now we're talking about loving your neighbors. I can't even love my family right. So I started working on that, and I started thinking about it, and I started praying. And when I went home just before Thanksgiving, Kristen and Hannah couldn't go because Hannah wanted to audition for the drama club. So I went by myself, and I got down there, and I called my sister, and I asked if I should pick up her daughter, my niece, from school so we could go hunting. And she said she'd love it. So I went and I picked her up, got her out of school early, so I don't know if it was because it was me or if I, just because I got her out of school early, but we went. We didn't do anything. We just sat out there in the woods, and she was telling stories, and I was listening, and we were laughing. We actually did see some, but we just had a good time. We went back up. It got dark. We went back up to the house, and she hugged me, and she said thanks. I was like, oh, no big deal. And then the next day, my mom invited everybody over for the Thanksgiving feast, and my nephew and my other two nieces, they were there. And I just wasn't a jerk for once. And I was hanging out with them, and we were talking and telling stories and playing games and doing different stuff. And then they got to looking at me like I was some kind of weirdo, and they were like, wait a second, like, this isn't normally you, and this isn't how you treat us. But they kind of liked it, I think, because at the end of the evening, they all came and gave me hugs without their parents forcing it. And so then at Christmas time, when we went back home, I had Christmas dinner that evening and hung out and did all the presents and stuff. And then I asked my nephew, I said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And he was like, nothing. And I said, hey, I'll pick you up, and we'll go out and we'll take the little guns and we'll do some shooting or whatever, and we'll just have some fun here, right? He was like, oh, that'd be great. He's 12 years old? 13? He's big. He's 6 foot, probably 2 1/4. He's a big lad for as young as he is. We were out there messing around for 4 hours in the afternoon. And this monster kid gave me a hug at the end and said, that was fun. Try to do the same thing with the northern cousins, with Kristen's nieces and nephews. Her nieces are older. Probably won't have much of a relationship with them. They're already doing teenage girl stuff. It's weird. I don't understand that. But I did treat them differently. I did treat them differently. And there was obvious signs that that's the way they want to be loved. And that's the commandment that Jesus gave us, right? To love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor like you would want to be loved. It was cool when we were back home after my nephew was there, and we hung out in the afternoon, and then the next evening they came back over, and I had a permanent shadow for 3 hours. The kid, again, like I said, he is no small lad, was next to me the entire time, wanting to know what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or doing different stuff. It was just crazy how much that changing my love pattern to my own family could change their reaction towards me. On paper, it's not that hard to love someone, right? All you got to do is love like you want to be loved. But when you go to put it into practice, it's just a little bit tougher. There's this saying that's going around right now. It's you be you. And I cannot stand that. Most of the new sayings that I hear, I don't like. But that one in particular, I just don't like it, because when I think about it, if I be me, then that means that I'm going to take care of myself, and I'm going to take care of what I feel like needs to be taken care of. And I'm not going to wait for somebody else to love me. I'm going to love me. And if I'm loving me, then I'm making sure that I am well loved, and then I don't have time to love others. I have a wife, a daughter, and 2 dogs. And then if I lived by the you be you motto, and I loved myself more than I loved everybody else, then that's not going to go that way. If we flip over to John chapter 14, actually I'll just read this one. It's just one verse. Don't flip. It says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. What were those commandments? It was there in Matthew chapter 22. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. The second major point that I noticed in 2 John was his concern for the people that he was writing his letter to fall for the deceivers. So starting in verse 7 and going down through 11, it says, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works." John has very strong words towards anyone that does not profess the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ our Lord. And he wants this church that he's writing to make sure that they're guarded against that. You'll also notice that 2 John has some similarities to 1 John. Well, obviously it's the author, but this is a letter to a church. 1 John may have been part of a sermon that he had written or a talk that he wanted others to hear. It is not anything that we have earned for ourselves, this reward that he talks about in verse 8. This is speaking about the church as a whole, working to add more names for the kingdom. And then verse 10, if you see false teacher or preacher traveling your way, and you know that he is not teaching Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, or that they are not teaching that Jesus was God's Son born from a virgin, then they are not to be received into your home or greeted in any way. If you're like me, that would probably be pretty easy. Like, if I don't want to talk to you, then I'm going to talk to you. Just make those guys pass on around. 2 John, the letter to that other church, a little bit of a focus on love and a little bit of focus on not being deceived. I wanted to mostly focus on the love part. The next minor holiday coming up that the kids enjoy is Martin Luther King Day because they get out of school. But some of the words that Martin Luther King shared during his life were very inspiring. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Hate is too great of a burden to bear, so I have decided to love. I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problem. These quotes from Martin Luther King come from a man that didn't do anything to anyone. It's just because of the color of skin he was born. And the passion that he preached. This man knew how to love. And you know how. Like I said, if you're customer service, you already know how to talk to people, and you already know how to treat people. Now let's just build on that. Are any of you withholding love from someone today? Is there a good reason why you're withholding that? John wrote this letter because there was an likely infighting in the congregation. Will you decide to be like Martin Luther King and choose love? We'll have people here at the end of the service ready to pray with me. If you choose to pray before the end of the service, there'll be people here to meet you if you need. Will you pray? Lord, we thank you for your word. Thank you for John, and for sharing a simple message. That he just wanted us to love like you commanded us to do. It's not a hard commandment. When we read it, to love you with everything that we have, and to love our neighbors as we want to be loved. Help us to put that into practice, because that's what it is. Lord, I thank you for this congregation, and I pray that